obviously this is sort of the end game process. We'll have one more meeting on Monday to ratify the report that will be produced based on any votes that are taken today on amendments and recommendations on the major pieces of budget-related legislation. When we met last, we're attempting to close out a few things. We closed out the fees and fine schedules with recommendations. We set aside the position classifications and pay plan as well as the capital program because there were a couple questions on those that we needed to bring back up before we could dispose of those. And I think we probably should focus on that, see if we can get those cleared away and make a positive recommendation with any amendments before we get into the operating budget. So I think when we left off last with the pay plan, there was the next day we were waiting to see whether one of the contracts were going to be ratified so they could figure it out into the classifications and pay plan. Do we have any report from Human Resources?
Hello, Melissa Lehman, Assistant Finance Director. I believe you all have the updated pay plan in your attachments that includes the 1% cost of living adjustment effective January 1st, 2018. And I also revised the fiscal impact note that states the same thing.
Great. So basically what is now in here is sort of basically has that, as we discussed the other day. And was there any changes? I know we'd spent some time on some of the classifications that needed to be changed, but is that it's sort of locked in?
Part of it. There's no new job classifications or anything like that.
Okay.
You have never approved.
Okay.
I thought there was one.
There are people moving from one to another, but there's no new classification. That's it.
But legal assistant was,
Yeah.
legal assistant.
In the Office of Law.
Yes, but that's already, no. Oh boy. Yeah. It's the current classification. Yeah. But you went to a different grade.
From A9 to A10.
Right.
I mean, it's only one.
Yeah, same position, just a different classification, which that grade, second grade, the grade set, are already in your package.
Okay.
So there's nothing new that changes that piece.
Are we supposed to know what all these numbers mean? I'd like to know what is a A2 or an A4? What's the pay? Do you have a table somewhere that would show that? I mean, we've had that in years past.
So looking at the handout on here, it does show the strikeout on the most recent version of our 15 seconds. Okay. Alderman Budge?
In our iPads, if you look at the first PDF entry, the position classifications,
It has it in there.
that's the list of what position lines up with
Yep.
that scale.
Welcome.
Hi.
So we were just sort of trying to follow up on our conversation the other day.
Right.
The most current document in here, basically now, if that contract has been ratified in the interim.
All 4 agreements have been ratified, yes.
So we can go with it as
unanimously,
described.
thankfully.
Great, okay. And as we were just discussing, there was one strikeout in the Office of Law Position, which is in the most recent PDF is listed in here.
That should only be a grade change, not a title
That's what I
change.
mean, yeah, I'm sorry.
And
So-
you decided to maybe on that side.
Alderman Payon was sort of asking about
The
sort of how
A's,
to
P's,
relate to.
and F's. Might need to look at that.
It should be the back of that document, though. It should.
Okay, so your pay scales or just, F is fire, P is police, and A is everybody else.
It's the next, Fred, if you go back. It's this one that says salary table. It's okay, it's just the next one or two down.
Thank you.
And this pay scale will change. You've probably already been told that, based on collective bargaining and what they intend to budget for everybody that's on the A scale.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions or comments? Sure, Alderman Finlayson.
The pay scale doesn't change until January, right? When the 1%,
Well,
0.5%.
not entirely true.
Other than
There's
steps?
additional longevity steps that are going to be placed on the scale for police and fire. We have negotiated additional longevity steps that won't be reflected in this fiscal year for police and for AFSCME, both AFSCME groups. But across the board increase would be a 1% increase effective January 1st, 2018. And that will be on all of the scales. That was negotiated with all four collective bargaining groups, and then the city's extending that to other city employees. But the longevity steps are only related to collective bargaining.
So that 1% is really tantamount to cost the city 0.5% because
Its
it's a
value is
mid-year.
0.5% in this fiscal year, be obviously carried forward, beyond as a full year, but
And who's not on, where are unrepresented in
are you
this
speaking
group?
about contractuals and temporary employees?
All of them, yes.
Or are you, non-represented includes those that are not members of collective bargaining agreements, whether they're civil service or exempt service, and they're on the A scale. But our temporary employees are not on the scale, and our contractual employees are not on the scale, although their positions may have pay rates associated with them as determined by the department, and reviewed by finance, reviewed by HR in those cases. If we have a contractual position tied to an exempt service or a civil service, exempt service position, then we followed similar rules, and that this is your pay range. And we have in the last couple of years extended the cross-the-board increase to those individuals in contractual positions. We have sometimes extended that to those people who are in temporary positions as well.
So
And I
everyone
have
is
to defer to-
eligible based upon the decision of the department heads, really, contract employees particularly.
Well, we generally adopt a citywide position on if we're going to extend the temporary employees of COLA, and to those individuals that are on contracts the same. And since we reissue contracts in July of the year, we can account for those pay rate changes in those contracts.
Are there any exceptions? And I'll tell you why I'm asking. I've had any number of calls, emails, looking into why some folks in this building, particularly the mayor's staff, are getting considerably higher pay raises, 10 to 15%, $7,000, $8,000, $11,000, $12,000 pay raises, while everybody else in the city is getting 0.5% next year. So how does that work?
I'm not aware that we're, without looking at the difference between contract for fiscal year 17 to fiscal year 18, specifically what that was, I'm not aware that we're making pay changes of that size without also maybe having a different job description that goes with the position, or having something that's otherwise the basis for the contract and the job duties changing, and therefore the compensation going with that.
Maybe, and I've been able to, I think, find it in our book. I
Uh-huh.
don't know where it is right now. But I will ask the finance director or his staff if they could explain Because it's hard for me to explain to the rest of the employees when you can see that there's some people, and maybe it is a change of job description,
That's a possible explanation for that.
but political appointees particularly, that are getting considerably higher pay raises than everybody else.
Go back and take a look at that. Yeah, we'll just go back and take a look at that and see what, do some fact checking.
Okay, I'd like for you to share it with the full committee, please.
Yeah, I mean, if there's any information to bring forward that talks about that, that'd be...
I'd like for us to deal with it here instead of in the full council, because it is going to come back. Thank you.
Okay. Any other debate about the pay plan and classifications?
I move recommending favorably to the city council.
Sure.
I'm sorry, bus went by. The additional what?
I want to make sure that the additional longevity steps are accurately reflected. So if you could just table it until Monday.
Okay, thank you.
Our best thing.
Exactly.
That would be good.
Thank you very much for your time. Yeah, exactly. We excel at tabling. Let's see here. Back to the CIP. When we left off, we had spent some time with Alderman Budge on his wayfinding amendment. I believe we had voted to endorse that, and there was questions about the building across the street, and looking for more information before we close that out. Look at this.
Thank you.
Very good.
How would you like to proceed?
Exactly. Who would like to walk us through this here? These represent your amendments, Ross?
Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa.
Sure. This is a list that Director David Gerald compiled based on the requests last week for the projects that were talked about that could potentially be broken out into different phases for additional funding. And Assistant Director Marcia Patrick and Sam Bryce is here to speak to these in more detail.
Great. Thank you. Welcome. Great. So, yeah, if you could just sort of walk us through here, what's proposed here and in response to the questions I think that were asked last week or Monday.
Sam Bryce with Public Works. In August, the city received, 2013, the city received bids for weatherizing the building, and that was specifically the exterior and interior renovations and remodeling of the first floor. The bids were in excess of the project total, and so only the exterior weatherization was completed. We put together a package so it can be bid to update the plans and specifications to remove the weatherization work. With 4 years of inflation, the cost is estimated for the interior work at $400,000.
Thank you. Alderman Arnett?
That would include an ADA compliant restroom on the first floor?
I believe so.
Okay. And the second and third floors would be usable but not for public?
I didn't hear the whole
The
question.
second and third floors would be usable as office space but not open to the public?
That is my understanding.
Okay, so we would have a fully rehabilitated building at that point.
Yes, again, that's my understanding.
And my other understanding was that as we delay, we run the risk of having the building regress, but more importantly, we have the risk of it falling off the CIP or going into the Eastport Fire Station or 4th and 6th Street overlay redesign, so we don't want that to happen.
I think that is always a risk with,
Right.
with every
Okay.
capital project.
Right, thank you. So this is good information.
Yeah, thank you very much. You, so the breakout on the Russell Street project was a question that I know was raised. You want to talk a little bit about the different years of funding and the more specification we have there?
And we put this estimate together about 4 years ago, and it was to renovate and redo Russell Street so there would be pedestrian access back to the Senior Citizen Center, and also have better bicycle accessibility and an improved roadway. We had broken that out into 3 years. The first was to do the planning and the design, and we'd estimated that at $101,000. Let me step back on that. We had estimated that with inflation at $130,000. Once we had that completed, we needed to go out and acquire the right-of-ways necessary to build this, because we know we're going to have some issues with the property owners out there. And we have estimated $132,000 for land acquisition. In the third year, we've estimated $678,000 for construction and project management. And that would take us from West Street back to Smithville Street. And so they would enter onto, let's see, it's not Peekabilla. Southville.
Okay, thank you. Any questions about this? I know there was questions raised when we discussed this before. Okay.
Is there a motion on the part of one of our colleagues to put this in the CIP?
Let's get to, I mean, if there's more of a conversation about it.
Okay, no, it
There's
is-
other ones, then we can get into any amendments people want to offer. Barbud, you want to talk about Barbud?
Barbud, we have done this project and designed it twice, and it's fallen out of the capital budget in both cases, and we've simply gone in and resurfaced the road for the residents. But we have estimated that will be $48,000 for land acquisition, $82,000 to update the bid package to reflect the project scope, as well as some changes that have occurred since the last time we designed it. And then the second year, we have $500,000 estimated for construction.
Okay. And if you want to touch on the wayfinding signage, I know we've been talking about adding some funding this year, but how you break it out between two different phases would be helpful.
It's broken down into 2 phases. The first phase would be for vehicular directional signs and real-time parking information signs. We're estimating that to be at a cost of $15,000 for design, $285,000 for construction, $5,000 for project management, and which comes to $305,000 more or less. Second phase would include a large gateway sign at the key entry points to the city. We're estimating that to be $6,000 for design, $80,500 for construction, $4,000 for project management, for a total of $90,500 more or less.
Thank you. Alderman Budge?
Yes, since Dr. Nash is here, I wonder if she could come and address the wayfinding plan and the active signage for the garages. It was my impression, which could be an error, that the wayfinding program that was in the CIP did not include active signage.
Do you mean the real-time signage that shows
Yeah,
number of spaces?
yes.
Phase 2 does include real-time signage. It hasn't been funded before this year.
Right, okay. How many real-time signs are we talking about?
2. Location TBD.
Okay. Would you get upset if we had some more?
I would not personally be upset.
Thank you.
They are expensive.
Okay, so thinking about the amendment that was brought forward the other day,
Yeah.
obviously, I mean, is your sense that's just sort of a more appropriate number to do, I guess I'm trying to reconcile the two numbers.
Yeah, I asked the parking contractor to give me ballpark numbers of what the active or the real-time signs would cost. And he told me they're about 10 to 15,000 each. So if this includes 2, I would take this number and probably up that to half a dozen, because you want to have some on the garages as well as on the signage that's around.
Our preliminary estimates that we got were more, there was another 0 on there. So I'm not sure, if, what they're envisioning for the real-time signs, if they're the same as what was envisioned in the plan. Maybe we don't need the
Probably-
100 grand ones, maybe we
Probably,
need
yeah.
smaller ones.
Probably not. I think, given the uncertainty, it's probably better at this point to use the number that I put in my amendment, and that, and then we'll be able to take the time to refine the signage plan. And if we can give some money back to the capital projects, we'll do so.
Okay, Alderman Arnett?
Well, except that this is gonna go into the parking fund and be a revenue bond, right? So it's not totally.
It would be a general obligation bond paid by or allocated to the parking fund.
Okay. So does that make it less fungible or
Well,
allowable?
we're not going to borrow the money till we know what we're going to.
No, I know, but
Yeah.
should we do it and then not need it? Can it go back elsewhere in the capital fund?
The sequence of events, as I'm thinking through it, like most other capital projects, is what we see in the capital plan are as close to estimates, sometimes a little bit higher, to provide some flexibility. Then, after the budget is approved, the plan is approved, those numbers are tightened up, if you will, either through an RFP process or some other procurement inquiry. Then we go out to bond. If we borrow, let's say $500,000, and the project cost comes in at $400,000, then the additional $100,000 can be reallocated because we already have the bond proceeds. However, if we, in the capital project plan, we have $500,000 and we only need, then we find out that it's only $400,000, we'll only borrow the $400,000. We won't borrow the full amount. Because again, we don't want to borrow money that we don't need. And then, quite honestly, if we pursue the bond anticipation note schematic, we'll be borrowing the dollars that we need. We won't be borrowing more or less, so it'll give us that more flexibility also.
Okay, so unless there's some other reason to change, even with this new information, where we were when we discussed this last time, which is to basically add to our recommendations Joe's amendment on wayfinding and that dollar amount to move forward. Do we want to go through some of these other items on this list and see if anyone has something they'd like to bring forward? Alderman Arnett?
But it won't be on this line in the general fund, it'll be in the parking fund.
Yes. For a transfer, yeah, exactly.
And so, and I had offered an amendment to the capital improvement budget to put in the now $400,000 recommendation for the Maynard Burgess house, so that would...
Is there a second? I'm happy to second it, for the purpose of
Second.
having a debate, okay. Sure, would you like to speak to your amendment, then we'll see what comments people have?
Well, I thought we heard a pretty thorough explication from, on this earlier. We're sort of halfway through making the building usable. We've got the exterior stabilized. We have an ADA requirement for a bathroom on the first floor. And then we need to finish the interior of the building. The second and third floors, I understand it, would not be, because of liability questions, I understand, would not be available to have members of the public in, but could be available for office space on the second and third floor.
Yeah, I mean, my sense is, we've spent in previous budgets taxpayer money to go down the road of making this a usable building for the city, and we sort of got halfway there and then stopped, and that's really not a great use of those resources. So if this is what it costs to get us to be able to have some use of the building for the city, it would make some sense to me to spend the money. Any other comments or questions about that Alderman Arnett's amendment? Sure.
So we would request the increase in
That's what these numbers seem to... Yeah. And there is always the possibility that we can get some matching grants. So it would be a ballpark figure, and we'll adjust it just like you mentioned with everything else. And there's more than one possibility for matching grants. There's still potential from other organizations that they would want to get in on this, including, I understand from a conversation with Mr. Kardash, we could go back to Maryland Live for a smaller amount. They weren't interested in a big hit, and they wanted something that was more immediate, but I think it could be reapproached, and there were a couple of other groups that Lisa Craig mentioned are potential match, some kind of matching grant.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on this particular amendment?
Yeah, maybe Bruce just asked this question. Is that 400,000 now? That's supposed to be
Correct.
fine? Or is that?
400,000 in the bond column. I don't know what we want to do with the 100K in the other column.
It wasn't funded, so.
Yeah, it was.
My recommendation would be put it all in the bond.
Yeah, and if grants come in, it's,
Okay.
But if you put it in another, and you don't have other,
yeah. No, it's-
you're off.
City manager always has other.
Okay, moved and seconded to add the $400,000 for the Maynard Burgess House interior repairs to the capital budget as bond proceeds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No.
Okay. The other two that we have some more clarification on, is anyone interested in pushing any of these forward this year? Sure.
Did you just approve just the Maynard Burgess house, or
Yeah.
all four of them?
No, just Maynard Burgess.
Oh,
so-
okay.
And wayfinding, yes.
So Barbud and Russell need champions.
What?
Need a champion from the council.
Down Russell Street, is that?
No, we haven't voted.
Oh, you haven't
on it.
voted at all?
We haven't
Okay.
even moved it for discussion, so.
Okay, may I ask that we use our mic so we can hear everything, please?
It'd be helpful to have the, the representative of the ward, make a case for it, I guess, but,
May I speak for, is that what you
Absolutely.
want?
Sure.
I can speak for Russell Street. I don't know how long this has been in our CIP, We renovated the Bates Legacy Center after 26 years to the tune of about $26 million, and we opened in '05. And here we are, 2017, and we still don't have sidewalks to get to the facility. It is probably one of the most utilized multi-generational buildings in the city, with the Boys and Girls Club there, the senior center, the county senior center, plus the senior residences, plus the Heritage Center, which is our museum piece. It is in constant use. I'm not even going to get into Smithville Street and the need to fix that street, but right now what's in front of us is Russell Street. So I would ask us to seriously consider it is time, and heaven forbid that we don't want to go through another year with seniors trying to make it from West Street past a car dealership to get to their facility. So please.
So the year one money would be $130,000 to fund planning, design, land acquisition, and project management. Is there a motion?
Wait a minute, there's two different numbers there. There's year one, 111. What is the 111, 159, and 670?
I'm sorry, I thought I heard him say 130, but,
I think
the
Mr.
sheet
Bryce
we
said
have.
that was the old cost, did you know?
yeah, that it, when it was done a few years ago, and it goes up to,
Oh, I see.
Looking at the notes here, what we have estimated as an updated cost, the first phase, which would normally be your planning and your preparation for right-of-way acquisition, so the preparing of the plats, doing the appraisals to put a value on the property, we have estimated for $130,000. For the second phase, which would be for the actual land acquisition, we are estimating that at $132,000. And then in the third year, we're estimating $670,000 for the construction and the project management inspection portion of it.
okay.
And I think the thought process is that particularly when you're dealing with the larger corporations that you've got there, you're going to wind up dealing with Coons Ford. In many cases, you're not going to be able to get that land acquisition done in a year. It's going to be spread out over a period of time, and there's no sense in asking for the construction money until you've got the land.
Thank you. So, do we have a motion?
I would move to discuss this.
Sure.
I guess my first question would be to the finance director, and kind of to myself too, because we're now experiencing creep in the capital budget. However, I also expressed the feeling of worrying that because I was the only one that sat on the steering committee, I wasn't accurately reflecting all of the positions of my colleagues on the council, and this is the time to consider those positions. These are heavily loaded towards the third year, this and Barba both, which is 2020. And thinking about our bond anticipation note, how does that square from financial sensibility? And I would just add an overall caveat to this. We know we're going to continue to have capital needs, even on the ongoing con. And then we know on the horizon there are some growing capital needs of the new kind called sea level rise at a minimum. So reflecting these in the CIP makes an even stronger argument that we have to consider doing bond anticipation notes. There's no way we stay under our target if we don't do that. So I kind of think of them in the same breath.
What I would recommend doing is
looking at your debt policy impact presentation that Davenport provided last week. And turning to page 27 of that document, and what this is if you recall, there were 4 different scenarios that were presented by Davenport, and the last one was scenario 4. And scenario 4 enabled the city to stay under the 12% maximum on the debt service to expenditure ratio, budgetary ratio. If you look at debt service to expenditures in this scenario, it grows up to 11.91% in fiscal year 23. And again, I'm just looking at the check marks. This is the only scenario that provided or stayed underneath that 12%. So what we need to look at too, though, is if revenues grow or expenditures grow, it lessens the denominator. So you have more ability to increase your debt service. But not knowing what those numbers will be, assuming I think it was a 2.5% increase in the revenue projections, particularly the real estate tax, we get up to 11.91% in fiscal year 23. If you add any additional dollars, whatever the project is, whenever you put additional dollars onto the program outside of the enterprise funds, so for example, the wayfinding signs won't put pressure on that ratio because that's being paid via the parking fund. However, streets or Maynard Burgess or anything else additive to the capital plan will potentially put you at that 12% threshold. So that's the cautionary outcome.
Sure, Alderwoman Finlayson.
You know, it's very disturbing to me, and I'm sure to others who are watching or will be, that we can figure out how to do some things and we can't others. This is a need that has been in existence, I know, for many, many years. And, I understand what the debt service compliance ratio says, okay? We found a way to make these other things work. So I'm asking you to do the same thing. How do we make this work? Okay, we found a fund to be able to pay for these things so that it will not put us in jeopardy of going above our debt ratio. So how do we fix Russell Street in a way that is within the same, same means of conforming to our needs?
Well,
we need to spread this out across all segments of our community, not just some segments.
Well, a couple things, okay. And we talked about a little bit of this at the Financial Advisory Commission this morning. We have to take a look at how we can do a little bit more pay-go. The more pay-go we do, the less burden it will put on these debt service numbers. So the more that we pay from operations, and it is premature relative to how we're going to get there. But I'm just saying, math-wise, the more we can do by pay-go, the less burden it puts on our debt service, and therefore the more that you can do on borrowing, okay? I was trying to be very, very careful relative to sounding that there's any priority. I don't set the priority, okay? But the simple truth is more dollars to borrowing means more debt service. And again, just a straight mathematical function,
think we understand.
it just pushes it up. I'm not trying to defer the priorities, relative to this Russell Street or Barb Blood or anything else. I'm just trying to say, the more projects that are put in via debt service, it pushes up that threshold. And it's just a matter of looking at different timing, if you will. If we can push some things out further and flatten the expenditures, that could be an option. But it's really just a matter of what are the priorities.
Alderman Budge, and, I saw it first, and then Alderman Payne.
An answer in part to Alderwoman Finlayson's concern. If we're bumping up against the limit, then a question becomes, what are alternate sources of funds? The CIP right now, for example, has the flood protection down at City Dock in as entirely bond finance. If we're successful at, the mayor and I went and knocked on doors and got lots of evidence. Chief Simmons and his crew put in a grant application with FEMA for $3 million to construct, towards the construction of the flood mitigation program down there. Those $3 million would come straight out of would get subtracted from our bond financing and open up financing for other projects, which is part of how do we make this work.
And anything we can do to support that. Every time we get a grant, and particularly those that Deputy Simmons has been able to secure, somebody else takes credit for it and directs it to some other source. So if we're going to think along those lines, and I like it, then we should say that if we are able to secure those funds, then those freed up revenues will go to where we need them to go. Barbud's another one that's been pushed out. So we need to pay attention to every segment of our community, as I said. So, if that's the route we want to go and we want to look to save money because we're getting grants, then let's earmark how we're going to use these funds, just like we did for the golf course revenue.
Thank you. Alderman Payne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I find myself almost totally agreeing with my colleague from Ward 4 with regard to Russell Street. It's in terrible shape. It's a heavily used road. I would add to that I think Smithville Street is in just about as bad a shape as Russell. And these are streets that are used by lots and lots of people who do not, in addition to people who live there are people from all over town who use those streets. And they're not all going, as a matter of fact, they're not nearly all going to the Bates Center. They're using it as a cut-through. On the other hand, Alderman Arnett has talked about this before, as have I over the years, and that is the borrowing is coming home to roost. We have used bonds for purposes that we didn't need to use bonds for in years past, and I don't think it would be responsible of any of us to, to go over the limit that we've been. This isn't the first time we've seen a 10 or 12% suggested limitation on bond payments. It's been this way all along, and I don't think it would be responsible for us to vote now to go over that in 2 or 3 years, because God only knows what will come up between now and 2000 and what was it, 23, that we will have to use bonds for again. I mean, I've got one of the worst streets in town is in my ward. It's Clay Street. The only good news is that there are sidewalks, very passable sidewalks, on either side of Clay Street, but you use that to drive through. And boy, I hope your shocks are working well, to say nothing of your brakes, because kids play in the street from time to time. So
Traffic calming.
well, traffic calming is great, but even that isn't free. I'm very torn as to whether to vote for this, because I agree, it's needed, but I'm not sure we can afford to pay for it right now. Sidewalks in West Annapolis, we're trying to build up the businesses there. There are a couple of businesses that have opened that I think are going to bring about foot traffic, and sidewalks are terrible. Well, we have to get sued for $1 million before we fix them? I don't know what the answer is, but we're in a dilemma. It's not an easy one, whatever it is.
Thank you. Alderman Arnett?
So, I find myself in sympathy for both of these, but to me, the reason I brought it up in context with the bond anticipation notes, I think it cements the fact that we have to go to that mechanism to support our capital investments down the road. In typical political kick the can down the road, this year we're only talking about 150 for Barbud and 130 for Russell. I know they have a tail. Hopefully some of the solutions like Alderman Budge mentioned as possibilities. It's also a possibility for the Maynard Burgess House. So, I mean, I would make a motion that we add both of these projects to the capital improvement. And I would hasten to add, understanding that these additions are coming at the expense of excluding purchases of replacement equipment for the fire department and for public works, because we did not fully fund those. So by including these, I think we're saying these projects have a higher priority than purchasing some capital equipment. And I'm willing to make that statement. But we need to do it understanding what we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, my view, I think it's interesting, we could talk a little more about whatever the facts recommendations are, but I've been sort of saying for a while that, and I think we made some strides last year on pay-go. In some ways we've sort of backslid because there has been more funding available in this budget to not have to sort of make those, but I mean, I think the thing that Mr. Bryce spends a lot of time on, and everyone in Public Works does, is the $2 million a year for general roadways. If some part of that could come out of general revenues instead of bonding that every year, the 10-12% issues get easier. And some of these things that are legacy projects that need to be dealt with, can sort of find room to get done in that. So, I mean, I'm not going to be here next year when this budget's done, but I hope that's something that people will focus on, and maybe by putting the study components of Russell Street and Barbud in, we get sort of as you said, you have to deal with the tail of it, but at least it's sort of in, and maybe that forces the next council to make some tough decisions around that. So,
well,
I'm for it.
Two things. I agree wholeheartedly in that. I think we've been saying the deferred maintenance, deferred capital projects citywide really should be looked at as a liability, because it's deferred maintenance, and deferred maintenance comes home to roost. And we had a long conversation last year. I'm looking forward to that same conversation going forward. Last year we did create a capital reserve fund, and we took $5 million from fund balance as a set-aside for PAYGO. So there is $5 million in that PAYGO account today available for capital projects. So I didn't want, and we haven't earmarked any of those funds for this budget, with the exception of a few PAYGO dollars that are outlined here. So there are. I just want to again bring to light that there are dollars in that capital reserve fund.
Thank you. Sure. Councilwoman Kirby.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The two street projects in question, Barbud Lane and Russell Street, the populations that use those streets are either end of the spectrum. Russell Street, it's elderly. with grocery bags going to catch the city transportation. The Barbette Lane, it's children going to elementary school at Tyler Heights. So they're both public safety issues. I mean, public safety vehicles, and fleet maintenance is important to this city, but those two particular populations, safety should be just as important. So, in the case of Barbette, I guess when I got on this council, that was the large issue with those folk at Barbette, and that's 8 years ago. And some 7 years prior to me being there, they were drawing out plans. And there's been some movement there, but why the land acquisition and sidewalks have not come to fruition is beyond me. It's just been too long. I can't keep telling these folk, it's coming, it's coming. It needs to happen.
So just to recap, we have an Arnett amendment to add the funding for the Russell Street reconstruction project and the Barbette Lane reconstruction project as detailed in the forms here. I'm happy to second it.
Over 3 years.
Yeah. So as described in the project, the dollar amounts by year here. Any other questions or comments on that amendment? Sure.
For Mr. Miller, at the last meeting, you gave us your policies for the 3 reserve accounts, one being the capital improvement reserve. Would that policy prohibit use of those funds for this purpose?
That's specifically why it's being created. And right now, there's $5 million in that fund. That fund was created 2 years ago. So that fund exists today. $5 million was put into it for fiscal year 16. And so, with the exception of a few PAYGO dollars in the 18 budget, now the remaining portion of that is available for funding.
Okay, great, thank you.
So that's our buffer to keep us from going over 12%. We may have to dip into that to smooth things out in a couple of years.
But as Alderman Budge pointed out, there's a variety of drivers on the capital budget, including other additional grant funding and sort of other sources, and at some point, PAYGO, right, that can help alleviate some of that pressure. So
Yes.
I'm comfortable with that going forward. So the amendment to add those has been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? No. Okay. Any other amendments to the capital improvement program for our consideration that anyone would like to bring forward? We have a motion to favorably recommend the capital improvement program as amended.
So moved.
Is there a second?
This includes the entire program, is that correct?
Program as submitted with the amendments we've just passed.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. The capital improvement program's knocked out, and now we're on to the operating budget. I know Alderman Arnett has prepared some amendments he'd like to consider. Rather than just sort of working through by department, we can sort of start there and then see what other specific ones people have and sort of go through that way. It's probably the easiest way to handle it. Thank you very much for your time. So why don't you
All right.
kick it off, Ross?
So I have proposed amendments and for increases in spending and a proposal for how to cover that increased spending. I will note immediately that one of the proposed new positions is not being well received by the administration and I think needs some further clarification. I had a very good conversation with the city manager, but I'll save that to the end. So the first recommendation is to approve $100,000 for an auditor. This would be a person who would serve the soon-to-be-created Audit Committee, which is a companion-type committee to the Financial Advisory Board. My suggestion is that that person report to the city manager because he doesn't have enough to do. But I think to keep separation from the finance department, I think the optics of that are appropriate. The next one is for a budget analyst, and I didn't have the time to write this up, but I think there's a demonstrated need for a senior level budget person in the finance department. This year was particularly onerous for the finance director because he was not only working on the budget but also working on a whole new set of tables that were used in the bargaining process, and I think saved the day in the bargaining process. It was a very open, transparent, shared model that gave all of the bargaining units every bit of information that the administration has. I don't think we can continue to rely on our finance director also being our chief programmer. This would be a person that could do a lot of the work on expanding the pro forma, but also getting into this new balance sheet kind of accounting that we've discussed earlier in this process. So I think that it also is a person that could take some burden off of Melissa. She's also juggling a lot of things. I told her this already, but she did a really great job of presenting the capital budget to the FAC this morning. I think that's a very important thing, and I think there's lots of things on her plate. So this is a resource that at a senior level in the finance department that I think could be used quite productively. Planning, and I'm sorry Alderman Budge went out, but in the planning department there has been discussion of moving the small and minority business position into a planner position. I think some of us think that we actually need that resource and more resources in our overall economic development efforts. And so I'm proposing that we provide a new planner level person to work with Dr. Nash. There's strong pressure to gear up to get into the next comprehensive plan, and strong pressure to finish the last comprehensive plan. And I think this person would be is essential, and certainly will be a busy person. The dollar amount is on the high side because I think we need somebody who can come in. These numbers, by the way, are loaded with benefits. So think 70,000, not 100,000. This is a person that can jump into the traces right off the bat, and I would remind everyone that planning and zoning was, as a percent, the department that was most heavily hit when we were recovering from our financial difficulties back in 2009. In fact, the staff was cut in half. I think fire took a bigger number of cuts. They took 12, but planning and zoning took a 50% reduction. And so I think we need to climb our way back. I am particularly under pressure right now with land use issues, and I think Alderman Payon, you came to my town hall meeting because you're starting to feel that. It's always a pressure in Ward 1, and I think we're going to feel it throughout the city. So to me, this is an investment that is well made. Now, the attorney position is a position, it's essentially counsel for the council. The pushback that I've gotten, and I had a healthy dose of it yesterday afternoon from the mayor, is we can't have two city attorneys, chief city attorneys. I'm not sure I know why we can't. It could make life even more fun. You'd spend less time watching what's going on in Congress and watch what happened. But I think that the notion that I have here, which may not be fully elaborated, is this is a person that can help us with parliamentary issues, issues understanding the code, and most importantly, a person who can help us write complex code. So it would be a resource. I think it would be, in my concept, our resource. And again, I would have this person, in my concept, reporting to the city manager to make that person distinct from the rest of the Office of Law, but that's certainly a debatable construct. So this is $400,000 worth of new staff. I think we have been, and I understand it because I've been part of it, we have been scrimping and saving on the budget. I am still subscribing to that, but I think that we are cutting off resources that we need for down the road issues that are looming and are putting more and more pressure on us. I would propose that we finance this by not having the half-a-cent reduction in the property tax rate, that we keep it at 64.9 cents as opposed to dropping it to 64.5 or 4 cents. That is an interesting idea, but it turns out that it has very little impact on individual tax burdens other than people at the very high end, and I think comes at the expense of developing resources that we really need to make the city run. So that would be my sense of how to address that. I don't know whether you want to talk about that now and then we can move on,
Yeah,
or
let's
talk about them individually.
Let's do that, sure. Alderman
I'd
Pam?
certainly welcome getting a sense of what my colleagues think about this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can support the part of the amendment for an auditor, council auditor, but beyond that, I don't think so. We simply can't afford it, and the half-cent rollback will raise about between $300,000 and $350,000. It does not pay for $400,000, and we don't need to go, farther in debt. I don't think we need the other positions so badly that, I mean, what are we going to do? Take out a bond to pay for it? I mean, that's what we've done in years past,
No,
and
I have an answer. Previous year's savings. That's what it's there for.
which are already committed to other projects.
No, they're not.
I've been told to the contrary.
In its entirety?
Perhaps not.
Pardon? And that's the totality of prior year savings? No, I think we have a lot more than that. The city manager has been doing an incredible job of giving us high budget amounts
Yeah,
and
of
then
what?
not spending it all. I think there's plenty of room in that, and we do need to talk about a policy of what prior year savings is versus fund balance, but that's,
Let's get into the specifics of the amendments. Alderman Kirby?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me ask Mr. Andrews, this question is probably better for you. When the council does need an attorney, if, for instance, tons of things that happen during the course of the terms where we seek the help of outside attorneys other than city attorneys, where does that money come from?
There is an amount in the law office's budget as well as an amount in the finance department's budget for outside counsel.
Okay. So now, if we can't afford attorney as a council for a body, and I don't necessarily believe that we would be having two attorneys, because law is law and they should gel. I don't know what that logic is. We've certainly had issues on this particular council with differences of opinions from our attorneys. So if that's the stick point, then I see that, but say that. Don't put it elsewhere.
that is a sticking point, not just with the mayor, but with the city attorney and past city manager, but also past city attorneys. Way back as far as Shane Spencer, because Dick Israel and I raised this way back then, and he said you can't have two city attorneys that are speaking for the administration. I have to accept that Shane was a very good lawyer, has gone on to be a very good judge. What's his name? Steve Kling said the same thing. So it's not a new argument, and I have to give it credence. But I can tell you right now, I'm feeling hanging out in the breeze in terms of my attempts to get help. And we need to remember, this isn't a criticism of the Office of Law. They're down considerably. Several factors. There's factors for each of the 3 remaining attorneys that limit their availability. And I think that's a real resource issue. Hopefully we'll remedy that on its own. But I have felt long a need to be able to get this kind of help where we have the first priority, not the 3rd or 4th level priority.
I guess the question is, right, in the past it's been done, as was said, right, that the Office of Law can outsource a particular issue to another lawyer, right, that has some expertise, and we fund a chunk of money for that. Your belief is, though, it has to be someone who has to sit in an office here every day who is basically doing it, or is there a role that someone could play as that person you turn to when someone on the council wants to do some complex piece of legislation or something? I'm just trying to
I think it
think that through.
could be an attorney that's on retainer, or even a law firm that's on retainer. But I asked for outside legal help when Mike Leahy was still here. I asked again when Ashley took over, and I waited 2.5 weeks to be told that she could not commit to giving me that funding. My need is and was real time. I can't, and then I'm dependent upon a decision made by the city attorney. I don't have a thing where I can come in and say, Tom, I need to have access to Karen Ruff. Say she's on our retainer, and I need it this week. That is just not there, and it hasn't been there, and this isn't the first time that it's happened. So I think, I would argue the council is extremely unsupported. I would argue boards and commissions are the same way, but I feel we are less supported. One would say, oh, you have access to 643 full-time equivalents. No, we don't. We just do not. We can have conversations with those people, but we cannot control what they're doing, cannot by code. We're prohibited. When the mayor and I were talking last night, I said, hey, it's great for you. You've got a city attorney, and you have their undivided attention and total control. I don't. I have to go hat in hand and beg and pester. The city manager did get me some help today, some immediate turnaround, which I'm thankful for, but it takes a lot of badgering, and it's not something where we're at the top of the heap. We are in a pecking order.
Alderman Finlayson.
We should not be groveling for an attorney. And those of you who have been around know that I have been trying to change our org chart so that the city attorney would answer to the council. Years passed, and the previous administration refused to take that step because of a campaign promise. And nothing happened, and here we are. We should have our own attorney. The school system has 2 attorneys. School system has 1, superintendent has 1. There's a clear division of labor. The mayor has very limited experience on this, so of course he is not interested in this. But others do it. If there is a will, as my grandmother used to say, there is a way. But to simply outline the responsibilities for each would eliminate any issue with who's responsible for what. It's a choice. And no one else, whether it's our law department or any other, will want another attorney that will be able to question some of their decisions. So we have to be realistic. So what is the point? We need someone that we can turn to and not have to wait an excessive period of time to get attention. I mean, some of my colleagues have gotten their own, what do you call it? Not council, document that you can just drop in information, because we can't get our legislation out. Now, I don't blame the law department because they are understaffed, like most of our other departments. They're down at least one person. We keep letting people go, and we never replace them. I mean, I can name any number of departments that are in this position, from HR to MIT. But that's what we do. And we save the money. The mayor's office right now is down a staff. We can take that, whatever salary that person was getting. But instead, the mayor has chosen to give big raises to others in his department using those monies. We should figure out how to use those better to serve everybody. Okay, so I think we need to do whatever we need to do to make sure that we have our own representation. We've been talking about it for years. The time has come. The auditor, totally agree. We had this discussion many times in the past. I have a concern about, I'm going down your list, about eliminating the small minority business person. And I know the planning department is stressed just like everybody else. I also am aware that the previous planning director deliberately kept his department small. When everybody else was increasing staff, he didn't want to, for whatever reason. And so now everybody's kind of paying that price. But we have to decide what our goals and missions are. You know, we have vacant businesses all over town. We have one economic development person with whom we share with the county. And we have businesses, small businesses that are supposed to be the backbone of any community without any support in the city. So what is our goal? You know, so I think we need to restore that position and make sure that the person in that position does the job and supports our minority businesses and helps them, and not just minority businesses, but small businesses to start up or stay in business. So I think we need to keep that. And what was the new one that you added? The
Budget analyst.
budget analyst, and I'm good with that one also.
Thank you.
Did I cover all of them?
You got it.
Okay, thank you.
So one quick question, Mr. Finance Director, this budget analyst that would be in your department, is this something you could support and think makes some sense about how to do the next budget process?
I can say yes. I mean, there's always more work we can do. And, for example, you know, the budget, the balance sheet, we have deferred projects. I'd like to get a new chart of accounts. I mean, I could name, so yes, there's adequate facility to provide.
Okay, so, but I mean, you have other vacancies as well, right? I mean, so I guess the question is, do we need the whole amount of money to fund this new position, or is there, as you figure out how to fill out your roster of folks, is there a way this position could be carved out in that?
We are currently advertising to fill all the positions.
So you already have it defined in what you're...
Right. Yeah,
okay.
exactly.
Okay. Mr. City Manager, you want to be heard on the...
We saw you staring
city
daggers
attorney?
at Bruce.
Is that what I felt?
Just a comment about the attorney. The county council has an attorney. Barry Tate was there for like 30 years, but he was part-time contractual. And his role was limited to parliamentarian during the course of the city council meetings and giving advice and writing legislation, but not opinions. The danger, I think, is if you would ask the city attorney for an opinion, you don't like that opinion, you turn to your attorney and have dueling opinions. That, I think, gets us nowhere, and it's conjure all kinds of conflicts. It might result in that. So if you do consider it, it has to be very, very clear, as you suggest, what the duties and responsibilities are of each. And I'm suggesting that the council would have very limited and probably not full-time responsibilities, like the counties, for example. For your
I guess,
consideration.
and thinking about it, I mean, that in some ways we're at a unique moment because we are, you know, in an election season, we're going to have a new council. That's obviously always a good time, but if you're going to change anything and how things work at the beginning of a term when you might have a variety of different people on the council and potentially in the mayor's office to make those changes, So, I mean, that strikes me as, if we're going to introduce this new model where you have this council, it would make some sense to figure out how to do it, to launch it in this period. I also think, and the fact that the city attorney position has not been filled, you know, I mean, if you're going to create that and then you have a new person come in, the city attorney, that's the logical time to put those people together and figure out how to make that relationship work. I agree, it is ripe with problems of, you know, each of us coming in and saying, but, you know, my attorney said this, so I want to do that, and then, you know, but I also think there's merit to how it could work if you could massage those issues. So I think it's worth trying to do and see if we can get the right person, whether it's in a part-time or full-time role, to figure out how to do it. And when you put the other people around them, it should help address some of these issues. So.
And I would be more than happy to follow the experience and guidance from the city manager of just any help at this point I would take. It's like a life saver out there. And then we can see how it goes. And maybe we do this on a trial basis, and if it turns out we don't use it, we can reconsider. So we could even you know, consider some kind of thing like that. But I have a feeling that once the resource is there, we're going to find that we will use it.
Okay. Other questions or comments on any of the stuff? Sure. Mr. Finance Director.
I probably should leave well left alone, but regarding the internal auditor position, the internal audit is a critical function. Best practices, be it corporate side or municipal governmental side, the stronger internal control environment of any organization, the better off that organization is. I just try to coach that the audit committee be well defined and the responsibilities of the audit committee be well defined, and that there's that relationship of the audit committee is critical, not only to the internal audit function but to the external audit function. And it has, you know, and try to keep that at a level where the true intent of those two functions, because they're both critical, are to the internal audit of the organization.
Thank you. And yeah, sure, Alderman Budge.
In the interest of examining other alternatives, this committee ought to be aware that this morning the Financial Advisory Committee voted to not reduce the tax rate and to use the funds thereby generated for PAYGO, specifically for this, put it into sidewalk fund. Yes.
We look forward to receiving their report.
I'm not suggesting that as for or against Alderman Arnett's, but it's just something on the table that will be in this mix that you ought to consider.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, my hope is obviously the Finance Committee makes the recommendations based on the information they have at the time, and as we get to the full council and the final vote, that's obviously those outside groups can chime in, and yeah, I'm with you.
So we're supposed to put a toll booth up on Russell Street or something? I mean,
Yeah, there
come
you
on.
go.
Perfect.
I've heard of the Eastport Bridge maybe, but
Yeah, we're getting rid of that.
Okay, so if there's no other questions or comments about the 4 different Alderman Arnett amendments, in hearing Alderman Payone, maybe we should just take them separate instead of taking them as a block. So if you'd like to move the
auditor?
Yeah.
I would move recommendation from the Finance Committee to the council that we hire an auditor, city auditor.
second.
All in favor?
Aye. I would like to move recommendation from the Finance Committee to the City Council that we hire a budget analyst.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
I would move that we recommend to the council that we hire an attorney for the City Council. as described by the city manager in this discussion. As described and advocated for by the city manager.
I'm not sure that's exactly what happened, but second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? No.
And I finally would move that we hire a planner for the Planning and Zoning Department, specifically because it's needed, but also to avoid the loss of the small and minority business coordinator in that department.
So when and I'll second it, but so just when Nikki's putting together the report, we were basically, the mayor's budget took the money away from that position and moved it to the planner, keeping the planner and putting the money back in the small minority business.
Yes.
Okay. Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? No. Okay.
The next item that I was recommending, and we had a very good report from Planning and Zoning, and it talked about all the things they've done, which is considerable, but all of the things that are outstanding, which in my view are important, maybe even critical, and the amount of money they estimated to complete these studies was $795,000. Land use, after headlines on murders, I think land use is the thing that takes up the most space in the Capitol. I think my understanding from several different parts of the community and also parts from without the community, outside, we are in a very liable position because we have not completed these studies. They're required under the power of state law, and some of them are critical to current and impending land use items. So we discovered, I had not really been aware of it, that there is this revolving fund for studies. I thought the number was 300 or 350, but I think I've been corrected to $260,000. Not all of that will necessarily be spent at one time, but it's clear that the $800,000 demand on that fund far outweighs the $260,000. So I was recommending putting money into that revolving fund. I was thinking out of the prior year's savings. Did you have another idea, Bruce?
My recommendation would be that as part of the annual closing process, we appropriate dollars for studies every year. Historically, those dollars have fallen to fund balance. Starting, I think, about 2 years ago, vis-a-vis why there's money in that revolving fund, rather than having that money fall to fund balance because we know those studies are going to be coming down the pike, we earmark those funds into the revolving fund so that they don't go to fund balance, that they can be used because they're already appropriated for that same purpose in the future. So, as you said, the whole constraint in this cycle, if you will, is when those funds are going to be used. If it's an immediate need, then there's going to be immediate dollars, of course. If it's something that is 2 or 3 years out in cycle, I would recommend each year, as discussed, closing the money from planning and zoning to the revolving fund account, and then use those funds for that purpose going forward. You may want to go even further and say, as part of the closing process, all funds, not just the ones earmarked or appropriated for the studies in planning and zoning, all additional funds, including the salaries and that type of thing, rather than falling to fund balance, go into the revolving fund for planning purposes. So rather than having that one initial shock to the system, if you will, you have an ongoing process where those plans are being funded. Again, it's really a cycle of when those first dollars are going to be needed.
So is that, I mean, if we were to go that route, is that a policy change we need to basically try and obligate up to a certain amount?
I tell you the truth, I would just have it part of your budget recommendations, so it gives me the authority at the end of the year to transfer those excess funds to the planning revolving fund. And then,
Actually, I'll ban it.
but then you might want to put a cap on it. Once
Yeah,
it reaches a
exactly. You want
cap,
to go or never.
then that goes away. But we know that those studies are going to be needed going into the future, and this is just flattens out the spikes. It just flattens all that out so that those funds are there.
Alderman Fayon.
Can we take care of what you suggest within the present framework of the budget? I mean, I don't want to raise, I think the budget's high enough. I don't want to raise the budget, but if you're telling me that there's already money there for this, then that puts things in a different light.
What I would say is, again, if you direct finance to close excess funds from planning and zoning to the planning revolving fund,
Only from planning and zoning?
you can, well, how much, or you say, okay, there's a couple competing needs here. We have a fund balance policy that says 50% goes into your stabilization after the, stabilization, budget, and then capital, okay? So the rainy day fund gets the bite of the apple first, and then the second bite is the budget stabilization, and the third bite basically is the capital, okay?
Now, this would be a fourth bite?
This would be a fourth bite, which would supersede the first one, okay? Because we never get to fund balance, okay? So if you say, take any excess funds and put it into the planning revolving fund, that takes off that amount and puts it into the planning revolving fund.
Okay, so,
You didn't get an answer to your question.
so the answer is?
Well, what I would recommend, again, because we're just talking about planning, and because it's a relatively de minimis amount and won't materially impact your fund balance, step one, and then you can come back and review it in year two, is step one, take it from planning and zoning. So any excess appropriations, rather than going to fund balance, goes into the revolving fund. See how that builds.
How much are we looking at total? You were looking at about
$800,000?
$500,000?
Well, 800 is the total amount for the studies. There is
But
some,
there's 260, I thought, already
260,
there.
right.
So we're looking for 540,000.
600.
So are you suggesting we add $180,000 or maybe first year 200,000?
When I'm saying at the end, can you know what the fund balance, just what paying turned back to the fund balance last year when you audit? Exactly.
Well, while you're looking for this, let me say, I thought this was a revolving fund for studies. Planning and zoning isn't the only group that does studies, are they? I think, I thought it's just planning and zoning. I just can't imagine they're gonna have, enough spillover money.
Already have. It's like 200,000 plus. Yeah. Okay. Last year, because we could have put, I think we put about $200,000 into the planning revolving fund last year. We could have put an additional $44,000 in if we said everything goes in from planning and zoning into this planning revolving fund. Again, so if you put $200,000 this year, I'm just using round numbers, because there's money already appropriated in the budget, as there's money appropriated in the 18 budget. If they don't use those funds for those intended purposes, and then any other monies that are not used, you're growing that fund by about $250,000 a year.
See, I don't like the uncertainty of that. At least they're studies by state law and by a council passage of the comp plan, we have to do. They
No,
haven't been done.
Right.
And the amount we were given, which seems reliable to me, from planning and zoning is a total need of $795,000. I don't want to see whether they didn't spend all their money, and I can't imagine they can commit to studies. These are things where we go out and contract. They can't commit to studies only to the extent that they don't spend all their money. It's almost like you're punishing them.
No, we already appropriated about $200,000 in the budget for studies each year.
That's not even.
I know, but the other side of the conversation is, one of the reasons I understand that they don't spend it all is because they don't have the horsepower to spend it all. Okay, so you can put $800,000 in and put it in this account, and it's going to sit there. Okay, I'm just saying, it's a policy decision. You can use $800,000 and put it into this account and let it sit there, or you can do it over time so there's no spike in the appropriation.
And to that point, I mean, if you take a step back from the one-year budget thing we're doing now, trying to figure out how to bring it in, balanced, there is, because of, I'd ask Dr. Nash.
Well, I was going to do that.
Whether you do all the studies that are called for in the first couple of years after a 10-year comp plan, or you're doing them now on the heel, before we start the next comp plan, it shouldn't be the same amount every year over 10 years, right? It should have some ebb and flows. So you're saying if you're creating a thing that will feed it with revenue year in, year out, then there's got to be some number where those balance out. But
Look,
you help us with this sort of.
I still don't know the answer to the question.
The answer is he's trying not to put any money in the current year budget, additional money. This was the answer.
Right.
Oh, is that your question?
Yeah. Yeah.
So the last few years, we've allocated the money so that comprehensive planning got $120,000 to do studies from the comprehensive plan. And then once economic development came into our department, we got about $120,000 to do economic development studies. Then it was clear we weren't going to use all of that economic development money. I pretty much encumber my money every year for the studies I do. But we knew we weren't going to use all the economic development money, so that money went to the revolving fund. I also moved my money into a different not to make it too complicated, but another revolving fund. It's all encumbered. There is this money in a revolving fund called economic development that is not encumbered. Is it $250 that's not encumbered? Some of that is actually, if not encumbered, we know what we're spending it on. This year, instead of getting $120,000 for economic development studies and $120,000 for comprehensive planning studies, we're getting $120,000 for studies. So we're getting half as much this year of what we usually use because we still have the revolving fund money. So we can, we can transfer that money to the revolving fund, and then decide amongst ourselves how we're going to use it, whether we're going to use it for comprehensive planning or for economic development. But it is less money than we have gotten in the past for studies.
That's very helpful. So sort of the model that the finance director was suggesting, if you have less money, the odds that at the end of the year you're going to have more left over to roll up to the fund is probably not as likely as it would be in the year where you had more.
Well, so for example, this year, since we've transferred a lot of that money to revolving funds, we probably won't have as much at the end of the year.
Yeah.
Then next year, so same thing with next year. Yeah, but we've already transferred it this year. So the fund balance, I would imagine our fund balance would be, like $20,000-$30,000, depending on the salaries.
Yeah. Yeah. But in trying to get to Alderman Arnett's question, I mean, the question is what's the correct amount that should be in the fund to do all the things that you have to do over the next 3 years by the time the next to get ready for the next comprehensive plan and then
1 year.
Well,
I think that is tricky because there are years we
2019.
spend, or we will, looking up ahead to the comprehensive plan, I know I will need to be spending more than $120,000. But we do have that money that we've saved in the revolving funds, knowing, we're going to need that money.
Well, let me just, before Tom, what over the past, I've asked, why haven't these studies been done? And there's been two answers, and I accept them as legitimate answers. We haven't had the staff, and we haven't had the funds. That doesn't wash when I'm out in front of an angry crowd in Eastport at a town hall meeting. They say, it's your job to get them that money, that staff, and that money. That's what I'm trying to do, both with the planner and with this, putting this money. I want you to be able to plan with certainty that you have X hundreds of thousands of dollars to go out to commit right now and put this new planner to work on right now doing these studies. We are legally liable. We're going to get sued sooner or later because we haven't done them. And if you don't have to take my word for that, you can talk to the Office of Law. There's a twofold purpose. I don't ever want to hear we don't have the staff and we don't have the money for doing this, and I want to have it committed in the budget so it's crystal clear that there is a directive to planning and zoning staff to get her done.
Mr. City Manager?
There's a third reason. The administration and council have asked for studies to be done that aren't on the list. That's the third reason. There have been studies done that aren't on that particular list.
That doesn't mean that we don't need the money.
Just to be,
it means that there's more
clear.
demand than we have funded.
But I think what we're suggesting at this point is that you set up X amount of money you would like to have in a revolving fund at the end of this fiscal year. If that amount cannot be made up solely from whatever is not spent in planning and zoning, it'll be made up from what's not spent in public works or wherever the case may be to reach that number. And if that number can't be reached regardless, then we're looking at a fund balance transfer. I think that's what we're suggesting.
So Bruce's four-step process is, the first thing that happens with planting and savings is it goes into this revolving fund. Secondly, it goes into the rainy day fund, or it goes into the capital fund, or no, budget stabilization fund, and then fourthly, and you think the orders of magnitude there are sufficient to overcome this $800,000 number?
Well, if you give me a threshold, if you're saying
Minus the amount we already have available.
so go up to $800,000 from current year.
Sound right?
Yes, I would say we don't need the $800,000 available to us next year.
Yeah, that's the question, is sort of how fast could you outlay it? If you had, as Alderman Arnett would like, a magic wand, and there's $800,000 sitting in there in that account tomorrow. Exactly. How fast?
Can we get 2 more planners?
That's the conversation of sort of how could you outlay that to meet these goals, so people can stand up and say all those studies are being done in the next X amount of months, right? But I guess the question is, so if it's not 800,000, it's 500 is the appropriate float in that account, then you're only waterfalling off from whatever end of year savings, a couple $100,000. Sure, Alderman Budge.
While we're talking about all these surplus funds sloshing around,
Exactly.
The city manager's monthly report reports that for the end of March, planning and zoning was at 88% of their annual budget for 75% of the way through the year. That does not give me great confidence that there's going to be a lot of unspent funds here.
He's saying across other departments now.
Those include encumbrances. That spend also includes encumbrances that have not been spent. So at the beginning of the year, I may encumber my budget for $50,000. That shows on that report as being spent. So you don't have a direct one-for-one.
Well, so at the end of the year, when we're talking about unspent monies, they're still showing as spent.
Yeah, but point in time. Right.
The bottom line purpose for this motion is there is not enough money. We know there's not enough money. We can argue about what that amount should be, and I accept that. That's what we do as council members. But I don't think that there's any realistic expectation that it's going to come out of planning and zoning. It's got to come from a larger source. I can accept the waterfall principle. My unease about that is, what if, after many years of success by the city manager managing the budget, we don't have a current year saving? Now we still haven't funded these studies, and so I like the reality, I like the leverage to be able to go to Director Gutwald and say, hey, I did for you, you've got 500,000 or whatever the number ends up, where are the studies? And so to me, this kind of an appropriation gives some certainty, not only that the studies are expected, but also certainty to the director that he has the funds to do these studies. He doesn't have to wait until some waterfall comes floating along to fill up the buckets. So that's, that's the long and the short of this proposal.
Alderman Finlayson?
Forgive me if I ask a question that's already been answered, but, and not to oversimplify this, is there a master list of all the studies that are either required by law? That's what I'm looking at, and I'm not seeing it here. I've been looking at it, anyway. That also includes those that are required by law, like the comp plan, those that have been imposed by us on ourselves, and due dates and years in the making or to completion, so that we could treat it like a CIP, in that we would know how much money we needed for which plan in which year, or which phase of each plan in each year.
That's what we were trying to get at. It's only a few years out, not, 5 years out.
Is that what this is supposed to be?
Yes.
Yeah, the last page.
The last page shows other studies that we've done.
Well, it says chapter reference and reference above.
Above that chart, right above that chart.
Then I need translation, because I'm not getting, because according to this, we have 5 or 6 surveys, plans, studies that need to be done, and we're talking about $110,000. I know that's not right.
So the last chart shows the implementation table from the comprehensive plan with the plans and studies that the authors of the plan felt were priorities and should be accomplished in the next 3 years, subject to the administration's prerogatives. The chart above that shows studies and projects that we've completed that were not part of the comprehensive plan.
So, for example, the Eastport traffic study's been completed.
Yes.
Okay. But the historic district code update is on hold.
Right. We did spend money working on that effort, but it didn't get completed.
Okay. I'm not seeing, I think there are other sector studies. Are they not part of the planning?
So sector studies that we've completed are on the first chart. West Annapolis, City Dock Master Plan, Upper West Street is largely complete. Those were called for in the comprehensive plan.
Okay, I'm gonna need some help
I'd be happy
translating
to.
this, because I can't figure out what the bottom line is. And by the bottom line, I mean the total amount of money that's needed and when for the study.
Right. If you look at the bottom of the first chart is projects that comprehensive planning would lead. The bottom of the second chart is projects that other divisions or other departments would lead. And we added those numbers together to get this
So 450,000, does that sound right?
plus,
That's what's on the bottom of the second page,
right, and then plus the bottom of,
and plus
The third.
350, which is on the bottom of the fourth page.
that's right,
So
that's how we
those-
got this 800.
Okay, so
number.
those two numbers added together.
Actually, thank you, Sheila. I think I've made a mistake. I
No.
just added everything in the funding needed to complete, and this should be lower by 300,000 because on the first page, funded needed to complete of 300,000 is for wayfinding, and we're taking care of that elsewhere. All I did to come up with my number was add up the dollar amounts in any of these funding needed to be complete, and clearly not all of these are studies. So we'd probably need to have a regroup from planning and zoning. Yeah, here's the historic district, that's $250,000. We got, well, the harbor line maps are not, so maybe I came up with.
Oh,
my
I guess
bonus
you're
number.
right about the wayfinding, that's the only capital project
Right.
that I put in there.
So the amount of money we need is probably 250,000, we'll just say roughly. I'd like to have a solid guaranteed number that we can give the Director of Planning and Zoning so that he knows these are the dollars he has available for studies.
What is the precise question you want Sally to, what is the precise question you want Sally to answer?
How much money is needed to complete the studies? Not all projects, so it wouldn't be wayfinding. It would be the amount of dollars that we could transfer into the revolving fund specifically to complete the studies that are listed. I thought this was very helpful and pretty clear, except I just didn't add right.
But those are the studies that are called for in the existing comprehensive plan. Correct? That's the number we're looking for.
Okay.
May I finish with my question now?
What?
I would like to know how much is needed for each year. I mean, I figured out that the total was at the bottom, but if we could go through and simply add up the columns, that would give us a better long-range look at what is needed, as opposed to just lumping it all together like we need it all right now.
And then it's even more complicated because once we finish this comp plan and start the next comp plan that has a bunch of new studies,
That's right.
it's gonna go like that, the dollar amount, the outlays, right? Like,
Yeah.
over
Right.
10 years, so it's,
But we should be more aware
I agree.
so that when we're putting requirements on ourselves, we can say, we're going to add this to whatever's already existing.
Right.
So,
I mean, for what we do each year, I would say it depends on the administration's prerogative of what you want to prioritize for that year. As we probably realistically can't do them all in one year, so which ones go first is,
Okay, 90%.
I mean, obviously, right now, we're doing Forest Drive, Bay Ridge, Eastport sector study. That's going to be a big demand on our resources. And then gearing up for the comprehensive plan will also be.
So, Ross, in thinking about this, all this information we've learned, which has been a really good discussion,
Yeah.
the overall number of what that fund balance would have to deal with all of these variables, but realistically, to hit that number, that you have enough to give people confidence that the studies will be done sometime in their lifetime, and and enough that you probably couldn't spend it all in 1 year, right? I mean,
Right.
if we set that as 500,000, say, and then we're at 260 now,
Right.
and we followed the sort of the waterfall idea across not just planning and zoning's budget, but other budgets. And once it hits 500,000, then it goes on to the next waterfall, right? And you stop funding that, right, in
Right.
future years until it's
Right.
drawn down. I mean, if that, I think that's probably worth trying for 1 year. I mean, but
Well, I would remind you that it is a revolving fund. So again, there's two purposes for wanting to do this. One is to let vis-a-vis the council and the budget process, let planning and zoning know that completing these studies is a high priority for us. High enough of priority that we're putting dollars behind our priority. And I also would like to indicate that there's some urgency to get this done because there's some legal liability outside of it. But after having this discussion, I think I would drop my recommendation from 500,000 to 200,000, added to the 260,000. It's not, it may not be enough to get all the studies done, but it's certainly enough to have some certitude in the planning and zoning director's budget that he knows those dollars are there to get these studies going. So I would amend my...
Your amendment, the way you want to do it, is not following the end-of-year funding thing. It is putting new dollars in the budget.
I want to have real dollars.
200,000
Right.
New line to boost the studies line.
Just a one-time only addition to this revolving fund of 200,000. We can go to that long-term waterfall scenario, but I want to make absolutely certain, and that's just me, 1 out of 9 votes, that those dollars are there, so we don't hear, well, now we have the staff and the time, but we don't have the money. Or the council ran away with half of our money because they wanted to do some other kind of study. I'd like to have some dollars certain in that fund over and above what's in there to make sure that these studies get done.
Sure.
If I may, what you're recommending is to transfer $200,000 from fund balance to the revolving fund.
Past year's savings.
Savings, right, fund
Yes.
balance, yes, okay.
And then not get into any language about other dollars at the end of this fiscal year and stuff. Just leave it alone as it is.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of having this cascade, but I'm not gonna...
You don't get both, right?
No, no.
Pay me now, pay me later, right?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
No.
So we're not going to get any language about that. We're going to take it.
That can be done administratively.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Okay. So the amendment is to transfer an additional $200,000 from prior year savings / fund balance to pay to the revolving studies account in planning and zoning.
Right.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any other questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Thank you very much.
I
Don't
don't
spend it
know-
all in one place.
Yeah. We've already handled the capital, the CIP funds, and I don't know whether you want to reserve discussion of the stormwater fees. We did have
We had a good discussion on
Good
it, but
discussion.
we have to basically get into, right, we have to go back to the fee schedule to talk about it?
right.
Okay.
And some of the pushback, I think, particularly from you, Joe, was, are there other sources? Do we have to raise the fee, or would it be prudent to not raise it all at one time? My argument is, we're gonna get grief no matter how much we raise it, so I'd rather have grief for the whole enchilada and have that grief one time, rather than say, well, this year we're gonna nick you for this, and then next year we're gonna nick you for this additional amount and this additional amount. So, again, I'm recommending across the board for the 4 fees that have to do with the stormwater, tripling that amount, which would get us...
Tripling each of them, which gets you to the amount of what is in
The
the
amount-
watershed
Right,
improvement program,
so instead
10-year
of
number.
850,000 a year, we'd be collecting approximately 2.5 million a year, which gets us, when you look at the schedule and the WIP, gets us to that level of funding. So that's the motion.
Any, I'll second it for the purpose of discussion. Questions or comments? Currently, the stormwater fee brings in about $800,000 a
Right.
year, and it would triple all of them
So it,
to bring in $2.5 million a year to do stormwater
for
restoration
households,
projects.
currently they pay $10.22 or something like that, and that's escalated by 2% a year, which isn't fast enough. So this would, all in one jump, make that $30 a quart. Big jump, it's triple what it is. But it's the kind of money we need if we're gonna execute the watershed improvement plan and start cleaning up the bay.
Who is paying this?
Everybody who pays
Households
a utility.
and businesses. all properties are paying it.
And you say
So
a
it comes
foot,
with your utility,
you're talking about front foot on the street? What do you,
it comes with your utility bill.
okay.
So yeah, it's a flat dollar amount for most residences, $10 a quarter.
And
for
by
the
the way,
stormwater part
that
of your water bill.
is somewhat offset by the mayor's, this year's budget proposal to continue to lower the, refuse, collection in your quarterly utility bill.
Sure. Mr. City Manager?
If I may make a suggestion, to me, it's a crawl, walk consideration. We're just about ready to embark, if the council agrees, to appropriate $1 million in the CIP to start our stormwater projects in accordance with the study that we just did and you were presented. I would rather have some experience under our belt with that $1 million. How many projects is that going to buy? What kind of grants are we going to incur to help us with that, et cetera, and then embark on a rate study to see what the real rationale would be for raising the stormwater fee. So that may be a year, year and a half, or 2 years down the road before we would have that information. To do it now without a real feeling for a rationale, I think, is problematic. So I would exercise caution and suggest we do that, and we give ourselves some time, experience in implementing the $1 million that hopefully you will appropriate, and going down the path of these $10, $15 million worth of projects over the next 10, 15 years before we start raising the fee. That's just my thought.
Thank you.
Two,
Alderman Arnett.
two countervailing points to that. One, the more you push it down the road, the higher the fee is going to have to go up if those costs are realized. I forget what the second point is.
Well,
but
the $1 million are dedicated to doing a lot of sort of,
catchment basin and
exactly,
things like
which are
that.
slightly different than
Yeah,
spending.
that's not the whip stuff.
But not necessarily, because we really don't know
Really?
yet, given the public-private partnership opportunities, the community-based organizations we've been working with, who've been very successful in generating grants for these projects. We really don't know what the bottom line net requirement's going to be from the city appropriation.
Alderman Finlayson.
You know, we are looking at what it's going to cost for some of these projects. And I think Ross's motion is to make sure we have money to do them. But another issue we have to be cognizant of is the projects that have been completed or will be completed in the near future have to be maintained. But the groups that are doing these projects are not planning for the cost for maintenance.
Yeah, they are. It's in their
No,
contracts.
they're not. Well, okay, to some
For
degree
5 years,
maybe.
for 5 years.
But they are not all. And so that's going to be an additional cost to the city, whether we want it or not.
You're
It's going to be a
absolutely right.
cost. So I just think that's something else we need to be planning.
And I think that would be a critical, and you're absolutely right, the maintenance is going to be our responsibility over time, forever, But I think that's a critical component of the rate study that needs to be done to set the basis and the rationale for the fee, and over time, how much that fee has to raise. I think right now it's a shot in the dark, whether it's necessary or not.
The silver lining is that 50 years from now, they'll be under sea level, so that maintenance requirement will go away.
Oh, and if we overshoot, a future mayor can come in and roll it back and take credit for
right.
basically saving money, so. Okay, yeah, I mean, I sort of get that this one, the way we're doing this versus how we've done, sort of, water studies in the past and all that sort of stuff is a little unusual maybe, but I do think this has been an issue that we've talked about, especially in the Environmental Matters Committee for years.
Yeah.
And to get the whip started, to get, and say, how do we get away from just sort of doing maintenance and spending this fee on people's salaries to do the stuff they would do anyway, and how do we get to breaking ground and doing real projects? And as someone who, looks out the back windows of my house at a creek that is, even in the number of years I've lived there, that is less passable and less, you can see the results of it. And my neighbors are always, on me of, when's the city finally going to do something about this? And in some ways, this is the investment to get serious about doing it. So I'm supportive, but I get that if we get to the full council, there may be some issues about how fast to phase it in or how much that amount should be, and it's probably best done with all of us. But for the purposes of our recommendation, I'm happy to second your amendment. Any other questions or comments on this? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? No. Okay.
Yep. Now, the chief has
You have
said
other
that-
amendments?
The chief has said that he will not let us out of the room until we discuss overtime, and I'm sure that if Major Baker were here, he would. So the debate in the past has been, are we properly funding the amount of overtime that we know we're going to use? In years past, I know Chief Christoph made this argument, he has to eat it out of other things like hiring officers. I don't know, city manager, whether you feel that the right amount of overtime is there, or is this going to be a budget target, and if they overshoot, they have to eat it out of someplace else in their budget? Their own prior year savings.
Well, over the last several years, we've managed it, one way or the other. It may not have been appropriated correctly in the individual budget, whether it's police or fire, but whether it's been excess ambulance fees or whatever the case may be, we have covered it. So I suggest that we continue to do that. And to the extent we can't at some point, then we have to talk about how we're going to appropriate additional dollars.
This was a topic last year. We wanted to raise the police overtime budget from 700 to 1.1 million. I thought we had done that, but when we look at the pro forma, it didn't show up there. But it was an opinion of the council last year that we ought to fund what we know we're going to spend. And if there's too much money elsewhere in the budget, don't put it in there. But having this sloshing back and forth is either that, or we just give the department heads a lump sum and say, spend it how you want. You want to hire people, spend it there. You want to have overtime, spend it there. But we're going to have this category in the pro forma. Seems to me like it ought to have some meaning. So that's why I raised it again this year, having raised it last year.
That goes to the whole discussion of what the purpose of the budget. Is it rock solid concrete, don't spend anything more or less than what's appropriated, or is it a plan? And does that plan get adjusted during the course of the year as situations develop? So that's a discussion that
Well,
perhaps you and I should have, but
in the inevitable words of Al Kirshner, plan your work and work your plan. So it is a plan, you're absolutely right, but it ought to be a workable plan. So that's the only thing I'm arguing. If we know more is going to be spent, then we ought to put that in the plan. If we don't think we want more than that spent, then we ought to put it in the plan.
But to an extent, you're absolutely correct. We do give the department head discretion on how they're going to adjust between salaries and wages and overtime. You know, are they going to use overtime in lieu of hiring? Are they going to hire in lieu of overtime? And I think that's a discretion they need in order to manage their department. And with 10 new police officers on the street, then, you know, there should be less overtime in the police department.
And, not to add on, but the, what's appropriated are two line numbers, maybe three. Salaries and benefits, operating, and then if, departments like MIT, capital. Those are the three lines that are appropriate. Departments have discretion within those broad categories. You have the pro forma so that you know what rolls up into those numbers. But when we control the budget and the transfers back and forth,
those are the categories that we look to, because those are the appropriations, and that provides the flexibility that's needed from time to time within the department.
Okay, well,
What's your pleasure, Ross?
Well, I raise it because it's been an issue. I look to the Baltimore Orioles over there to weigh in on public safety considerations. But, you know, it is a philosophical, as the city manager points out, it is a philosophical issue. It is one that has been brought up by all the public safety departments over the years, and Chief Stokes has educated me on one point, which is sometimes it's smarter to pay overtime than to hire extra staff, and we have to find that right balance. If the chief and the city manager agree that we've got the right balance for fire, and the city manager and Acting Chief Baker agree that we have it for police, I'm not going to argue. It's been an issue.
Alderman Finlayson?
I agree with Alderman Arnett, but I'm going to ask if you'll let Chief Stokes come up and speak to this as the
We're gonna get him
practitioner here.
fired.
Of course.
Leave Doug
Come on
up,
up.
because he's expendable.
I'm not going to comment on that. But it's a level of stress that we're putting on the department heads and the whole staff when there is a constant reminder that they're over budget, knowing full well going in they're going to be over budget. I mean, we know from the past how much overtime was utilized, and we can't come up with numbers that are more representative of reality. I don't understand that. Chief, help me here.
Do I have enough money in my budget for overtime? What is your answer to that question? This is my concern. I think I said this before when we met in the finance committee meeting last time, was my budget has gone down in the 7 years I've been the fire chief. Started off, it was 464, I think. Now it's 430. In that time period, there's been pay raises and additional training requirements dumped on us either through the state of Maryland Emergency Medical Services require additional training. And there's also some additional training requirements from OSHA. The federal government keeps dumping training requirements on us. So through all that time, plus the pay raises and other things that have happened over time, people's hourly rates have gone up. We've been doing a lot of creative things to manage the overtime, and I'll be very honest with you, I've been quite proud of how they've managed it. Chief O'Malley's done a good job day to day trying to keep our overtime under control. But the addition of Medic 8, the Annapolis Neck Medic Unit, has hit that overtime account as well. The good side about that process is I believe that medic unit costs us about $75,000 to $100,000 a year, but we're making $250,000 or so off that medic unit, so it's more than paying for itself. And at the same time, we're providing service to our customers, our citizens who are paying taxes for EMS service. So I think it's been a win-win across the board. But all that impacts the overtime. This year, our overtime budget is zero right now. We're actually in the hole. Well, first time since I've been fire chief, we actually ran in the hole. So the last 2 months of the year, we are operating on no overtime. We're just in the hole. My thing is, we are often judged by that. You look at us and how well we can manage our budget based upon our overtime account. And it's underfunded to start with. It makes us look like we can't manage our money, but quite honestly, it's underfunded from the very beginning. It's also not a true reflection of what our budget truly is, what our overtime budget truly is, what it costs to run the fire department. So that was my concern when we spoke last time, is that it'd be nice if it reflected truly what we spend and what we need to operate. And that's why I brought it up last time.
Thank you. Sure, Mr. City Manager.
How much additional ambulance fees are you going to earn this year?
Ambulance fees, we should, if all goes right, and it looks like we are on track to hit 1.5 million. Now, I'll tell you, from 3 years ago, 4 years ago, it was like 750,000. So we've almost doubled our EMS transport fees. And a lot of that has to do with, we raised the rate to match what the county was charging. And we've also put the Annapolis Medic Unit in service. And we've done, part of that Annapolis Medic Unit thing deal was, and what we thought would happen, so you understand is, when we did Annapolis Medic Unit, the county took that staffing and they staffed units around us at West Annapolis and Wooded Beach. So both of them now have 2 medic units in both their stations, with the theory being that would take the load off our Forest Drive medic unit going out in the county and the Taylor Avenue medic unit going out in the county. The county also put a full-time medic unit at Jones Station, which also took the load off those units. So part of that deal was, and part of the philosophy was that by doing what we did, our units would be available more often in the city to handle city taxpayers. Because when our units are out in the county, running calls in the city, taxpayer has an emergency, county units have to come into the city to handle our patients, our taxpayers, and quite honestly, steal my revenues, quite honest. So that was all part of that equation, why we did what we did. It has worked. As of last month, we had ran 222 less calls in the county than the same period last year. So that's 222 more times that we've been in the city to make us more available for our citizens. Plus, increased revenues has helped us. So we should hit 1.5 million if all goes right.
So what's the fix that you would?
Thank you. What's the appropriate number for overtime from your perspective?
550.
That's going down. Oh, 5.
Just take some of my EMS transport fees and give it to me.
Sure, Alderman Finlayson.
A little birdie on my shoulder here told me to ask you, how much business is Uber taking away from you?
Uber.
The Uber ambulance?
Are people going to the hospital or the emergency room in Uber instead of calling 911?
If they are, it's not affecting us. Most people have the belief if they go by a medic unit, they get better service or faster service at the ERs, which isn't always true.
Okay, thank you. Little birdie.
It's about, it's
You read it somewhere.
20 more. I think, though, the chief hit on the solution. The overtime has gone up because of increases in salary and benefits, so if we could just hold that down. I don't mean to make light of it. I think this is an important issue, and I don't know what to recommend to the colleagues. It's another chip away at the prior year savings.
Kirby?
Yeah. You know, last year was particularly tough on the police department side. And then we heard the current events. Director said that since she's just been here, it's been like 20 events added per year. So that would entail police and fire. And so I don't know, the numbers should show, it should definitely show in the police department, not so much your department. But I would think that last year, police, those overtime numbers would be probably higher than in the last 5-6 years, easy, just because of the way things were happening in the city. So I don't know, can you take a look at that?
Yeah, we can take a look, and we have taken a look. Again, part of the budget process is looking at not just the individual line numbers, but the bottom line in each category. Yes, the chief is absolutely correct, and overtime has been impacted because of the as he laid out. We've also increased staffing, which theoretically, I'm not saying I'm not doing staffing, but theoretically should help offset the overtime push. But fundamentally, yeah. Those overtime amounts have not been increased for the increases, and the attrition number has creeped up a little bit.
Well, you know, I just think about things like St. Patrick's Day parade. We used to just have a mild St. Patrick's Day. Now it's like a total full weekend and tons of people here. It's like 3 hours of band.
It's just a function of how much money is in the pot.
Yeah, but I guarantee you them guys are working more.
I'm not disagreeing. Listen, it's just a function of how much money is in the pot and where you want to put the money and how you want to spread it around.
Alderman Arnett?
So I would note that police did get a $190,000 increase from last year's budget, so there is a recognition there. Chief, how much are you underwater? You said you already have spent it all. So how much does that put you underwater? You anticipate for the whole fiscal year?
I'm guessing about 110,000, somewhere in that area.
If I made a motion for an increase of 100,000, would you be? I want you to know that I don't hate fire.
Oh, this is a payoff.
Exactly.
It would, fees, well, that's an interesting
But it
thought.
sounds like the ambulance transfer fee is overperformed what was budgeted, right? So we will see,
I think we guessed 1.3 this year.
Yeah, why don't we do this? The offset will be fees. But I already, just for everybody's information, I've already increased the income. It could be, but I think it's a logical offset to increase the overtime with increase in fee recognition.
so let's just to rephrase the amendment, that would be a $100,000 increase in the overtime line, to be made up by growth in fees, to be ironed out, but so that it reflects what the true cost is from the current year going to the next year.
Second.
Okay. So with that in place, and before we vote on it, I mean, obviously, do we want to, and how should we have an appropriate conversation about on the police side of the equation?
Well, they've gotten, well, first of all, they're not here. And secondly, they've gotten.
I can speak for them if you like.
They didn't sit through 2.5 hours of us up here.
I mean, the 190 increase is certainly moving more to what the history has been. I think part, and I'll just.
No, it's okay to say, we'll set that aside while we move forward.
Right. Let them come to the council and make their pitch.
Okay.
Okay, the amendment is moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Okay, looking at my list here, we have 2 things I think we haven't got to yet that we've discussed that we were going to do amendments. 1 or 2 are in the space of, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Just a question, Mr. Chairman. Do you not need to entertain a motion on what would be the fund source from Alderman Arnett's
It wasn't-
initial?
It was from the fees. The
No,
funding
no, no,
source-
I'm talking about the positions you were added an hour and a half ago.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Oh,
Right.
the tax rate.
Yeah, right,
Oh, you did?
And it's not for the full amount either.
right.
So you're,
So there would be 2 sources. The majority of it would come from leaving the tax rate where it is, and then a small amount would come out of prior year savings. We have 330 from the tax, and we have 400,000, so 70,000 would be touching the prior year savings.
presumably those would be,
Otherwise known as fund balance.
but yeah, presumably those numbers are not, it's not a true 400,000, because if you end up getting into part year people and
Yeah.
contract people, as you implement them, it's probably not that much, but.
Well, yeah,
Sure.
and I would recommend that process.
So is your thought to basically ratchet down the 400,000 for those 4 positions to 330 and be done
Right.
with it, and then if you need more money to pay for
Right,
them through the year?
because you are going to be, you're not going to hire July 1st.
Yeah, and so it fits into the exact trading out, that rollback for those 4 positions as approved
Right.
by the council.
And that's just coming from the Finance Committee. I
Yeah.
think there will be
Other amendments.
lots of debate by the council at large about these four positions, and all four might not survive, I don't know. But I like that concept that, because we won't spend it, now this is another kick the can down the road, because we will, if we hire these people, be spending it in the next fiscal year, but
Let's take care of the housekeeping of this, though. So the amendment is basically the four positions approved, the offset is rolling back the half a penny tax
yes,
decrease that was in the mayor's budget.
yeah,
Moved and seconded.
yes.
Any other questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye?
Aye. Opposed? Is it aye? Okay. Okay,
Of course, that's just for here.
other items, we talked, Parks and Rec, the latchkey program, the deal with the county, have we made any headway in determining whether they're gonna charge us those fees for use of the schools? Okay. So my suggestion is just for the purpose of us, I think it was $15,000 to mitigate that. We put that in, and if we take it out because they say they're not gonna charge us that, we're done, we're fine before we get to the final thing. So I'd move adding the $15,000 to the latchkey program that, as described, that is impacted by the county school system fees.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye?
Opposed? No. Okay.
Where does that money come from?
Yeah, please. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Out of the fire budget?
Fund balance, there you go.
Increase in fees of Parks and Rec?
Just increase in fees, and we'll figure it out.
So, and the other issue that I made a note, we're supposed to talk about the equipment revolving fund or something. You want to leave that alone for the time being?
Yes.
Yeah, and again, what I would recommend is just at the end of the year, seeing what we have, seeing what we need, and make the appropriate decisions.
Okay. Any other amendments anyone would like to bring forward?
Well, all right,
We do have some parking lot items, but are we,
Well, that are potential amendments for the operating budget?
Cindy, do you have a list of the parking lot items that,
I thought we ticked them all off last week.
I'm not.
What's that?
Thank you.
So we tried to, remember we went through all this last week?
Yeah, I'm
Prior
not
year
ready to-
savings versus fund balance,
We're
debt
getting the policies.
service ceiling, report language,
No, not today.
deferred expenditures, sprinklers in the historic district, rec and parks equipment, review, future CIP project, budget officer position. That's it.
I think, I'm not sure we resolved all those, but I'd be content to just see them listed in
In the report.
the Finance Committee report.
So if we can basically just, as the parking lot item, Cindy, put those together when Nikki's putting the report together, and it'll just be a page of items discussed by the committee during this process that have future action.
Need future attention.
Any other operating budget amendments? Alderman Finlayson.
I would like to move funding from a vacant position in the mayor's office to help fund one of the positions in Alderman Arnett's recommendation.
I'm not sure what that, is that,
Okay, what's the dollar
Jackie
amount?
Bowman?
Shayla,
Oh, Shayla, she's gone?
Been going on.
she's been gone for a while.
Sure. So I guess we would need whatever to consider it, what that salary line is and what the,
I will provide the salary and benefits associated with that in aggregate. I don't want to break it apart, but I'll give you a total number that you can move from that budget to this budget. That's,
Well, I guess we should ask to hear from
well,
the
yeah,
mayor's
yeah, I'm
office
just,
what they,
if
But,
that's the
and it's-
direction that people
It's
want to take.
available, but that would mean that there would never be a replacement. So we could then turn that office space into the space where the city auditor would live.
In a fishbowl.
Okay, so for the, I mean, the purposes of trying to close out today, I mean, so that's information, is it preferable to do it at the full council?
Fine with it. I'd rather it come through you guys, but,
Yeah.
if you want it to be a full council.
We're sort of charging the staff to basically write up our recommendations, so if we don't have the numbers, I mean, how do you want to?
I can run down and get.
Wait a minute, I can't.
It's your will. I can run down and figure out the number now. You can do it Monday. You can.
What do you want to do, Alderman Arnett, is your amendment?
I already had one peppery discussion with the mayor this week. I'm not sure I want another one, but I do agree, we need to know what the amount of money is. And I would like to hear 40, and the mayor has no plans to replace? Pardon? Well, then it is encumbered. If they're recruiting to fill it, then it's not unencumbered.
I can have this discussion in an open council, and that's fine. But we seem to be cutting positions everywhere else. And now that we have a vacancy in the mayor's office and we have some other opportunities, I don't understand not wanting to pursue it.
Well,
You know.
but it's not like it's permanently vacant. They're recruiting to fill it again. I do think there needs to be somebody there to
Well,
let people in.
A reality is that some of that funding has been used to increase other salaries. Okay? And you can speak to the finance department, because I confirmed my numbers with them. But one person in the mayor's office received an $11,000 pay raise, and another person between $7,000 and $8,000. Now, I know it's the mayor's prerogative to do that, but it just feels really wrong when everybody else is treated differently. And we're talking about giving employees a 0.5% pay raise. Just making it known. Everybody else out in the world seems to know it.
Let me verify that, because I don't believe that's correct, but I will verify and write up exactly what
Please do,
situation.
because I did before I brought it to you. To the body.
So, we meet again Monday to finalize the report. Obviously, the history, we've added things at the last minute there. We can have this discussion then, if you have it written up and we have a sense of, I'm happy to consider it then.
Am I in that bunch?
But for the purpose of today, I suggest we, so Nikki can start to work on the thing, we put together a favorable recommendation for the operating budget, which is the last piece we haven't dealt with, and as amended, and then she can start sort of working on those pieces.
So I move a favorable recommendation for the operating budget as proposed amendments from the Finance Committee with the proposed amendments from the Finance Committee to the City Council.
Is there a second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Should I need Ricky?
Unanimous. Thank you, everybody, for your work. Yeah, that's right. We have some minutes here that were on your agenda. I'm sure you all spent,
I
stayed
did.
up late poring over them. But,
I did read them all, and I move approval of the
Good.
minutes, all three sets.
Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
I move that we adjourn.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
See my brother.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Gee, I think this gets easier every year.